My name's Betsy Hillary. I'm from Purdue University Research Computing. I'm here today to moderate the room. Today we have Nicole Widmar. She's a professor here of agriculture economics at Purdue and the associate head of the graduate program chair for the Department of Agriculture Economics. She participates in interdisciplinary research, including support for on-farm decision making, from technology adoption to assessing food purchase decisions by consumers with varying taste and preferences. Widely recognized for her expertise in collecting and analyzing survey-based data, she has recently begun integrating data from social media and other web-based sources into her research. Her most recent work integrates insights from large data sets, including those developed from social media spaces, into agriculture and food markets. Today she will present a talk titled, We're All Listening, the Multitude of Astonishing or Petrifying Uses of Your Social Media Data. Please take a moment to silence all electronic devices, but feel free to tweet using hashtag Dawn or Doom. Thank you and enjoy.
All right, good morning. Morning. So I think it's a little bit ironic, right, that we tell you to silence your personal data-driven devices, right, as we're going to talk about mining your personal social media data. But embark with me a little bit here. We're going to kind of journey through, from a research standpoint, predominantly, how we're using social media data to better understand people's perceptions, decision-making, et cetera. So to give you a little bit of background, we won't belabor it. I spend a lot of time doing interdisciplinary collaborations, basically trying to work economic frameworks into on-farm decision-making, thinking about things like what do people want to buy in the supermarket, and then how do we produce that on-farm, right, in a reasonable, safe, verifiable way. So it's basically where these two things intersect, right? And the fundamental problem with doing that is that first you would have to understand what people actually want to buy, right? And so you know if I ask you, you will just tell me the complete truth and nothing but the truth, and you'll just lay it out there, including how much you'll pay, right? And then we can all go on our way. And obviously that's completely the opposite, because you know that when someone calls from a survey, you don't even pick up at this point, right, let alone tell the truth. And so that creates a lot of challenges as it comes to data and how we make these decisions. And so with that as our sort of starting point, traditionally, my research group has specialized in representative samples of the US population. So how can we think about collecting data sets that adequately represent different demographics, different genders, different age brackets, different regions of the country in terms of what people want to buy? So we've studied things ranging from dairy, meat, cheese, to how you acquire a puppy, right? So ranging from food items to pets to, well, we could debate whether that pet is a pet or the member of the family, right? But that's a different talk. And so all of these different aspects of things that you acquire to bring into your household, how do you make those sorts of decisions? So we use things like Likert scale questions, right? You've all been asked these questions. So how much do you agree with the following statement? Okay, so the problem with those questions is that you want everything for free all the time. Yes? Right? I mean, there's an obvious answer. So I say, do you want more? You say, right, yeah. And then when I ask you for money, right, we temper things a little bit. So we think about how to integrate things from Likert scale questions to multiple choice. Choice experiments are somewhat helpful in addressing some of these questions, right? So we can ask you to pick out products, and we can back away from that, what it is you're actually picking from or picking about. At the end of the day, everybody worries about survey data, right? There's lots of ways to pick on survey data. I will defend the survey data for a long time, right? That would take the entire 45 minutes. However, it has challenges just like any other data source. So in thinking outside of Ag Econ, right, so this is our department head. So if you don't know Jason Lusk, you could tweet at him, right, at Jason Lusk. We did not take him to Disney World when we went as a research group. But trying to think outside the box in terms of how we make decisions in ag and food, we spent a lot of time thinking about how we make decisions in other industries. So, for example, Disney World, particularly motivational in the standpoint that they host a data conference dedicated to data and decision analysis. Also, if you think about it, it's a created world, right, where you willingly share all kinds of personal data because there's benefit to doing so. So it turns out we as Americans are a pretty cheap date when it comes for sharing personal data, right? We all say we don't want to, and you're going to pretend to be really upset at the end of this talk and unfriend me on Twitter, right? But in reality, how many of us are carrying an iPhone? Okay, how many of you feel just a little like soothed when the iPhone tells you like 18 minutes to home, but you didn't tell it that you were going home, right? So on one hand, publicly, you pretend to be creeped out. But inside, you're like, oh, iPhone, right? Okay. Right, you know me so well. You're like, you and Amazon were like this, right? Okay. So on one hand, we talk about the doom side of, do you even have personal data left? I don't know. But then there's all the things that you want, right? You want the iPhone to tell you. You want Amazon to tell you the things that you need to buy that you didn't know existed, right? But you need them delivered in 2 days or less, right? So all of these things come to play. So the way that we've thought about it as a research group, you can go from just asking people to developing surveys to thinking about designed questions, right, dedicated to answer certain questions, to choice experiments, and the way we see it, linking choice experiments, so designed shopping scenarios, with what people actually say unprompted in social media. So when I put the two things together, is what you tell me when I ask you in a survey setting the same as what you say on social media? Because if they're not, then one or the other is potentially not correct, or both, actually, right? So this is our starting point. So social listening we can define as the process of monitoring, segmenting, and analyzing conversations across social media. We do it to measure brand sentiment, effectiveness of social campaigns, to fuel content creation for target audiences. So what does that really say? It says you put stuff on social media and other people listen to it, and then do things like target what they show you, right? How many people were appalled to find out that Facebook had been selling data? You can pretend, yeah, okay. So here's the thing, right? What was Facebook's business model from the word go? Free, yeah. So I'm an economist, right? Is there anything that's truly free, right? Like Mark Zuckerberg has a little bit of money, right? It had to come from somewhere. So the whole it's completely free, not so much. So let's start again. What's the model of Facebook?
You are the product.
Yeah, right? From the very beginning it was clear that the point was to harvest you, right? And so selling your data, while it was horrifying, right, especially when you find out that it was sold and then used in ways that generally were offensive on a moral, ethical, and many other levels that we could debate later, right? But at its core, it shouldn't be surprising, right? It was the model from the beginning. You give me data, I give you platform for free, right? And we all just conveniently forgot the rest of that. Okay, so people are listening, right? People are watching for what you're saying in different settings, particularly as it comes to online. From our standpoint, so we're listening using NetBase in the Department of Ag Econ. We can't see Facebook, right? So Facebook wants you to come and buy Facebook data. That makes total sense. It's the business model. We're listening to things that we can crawl that are not behind a paid wall, right? So thinking things like unlock Twitter, Reddit, blogs, right? You can pretty much think of it as things that you kind of put out there to get read, right? So it can't be too surprising that if you wrote a blog and you put it on the web and then I read it, that I'm going to listen to what you said, right? The catch is when I do it in such mass numbers, if I can gather insights about certain groups of people, how can I use that? And that's a separate question. So now how do we feel about that part? So there's limitations just like there are for survey data. So it can be really messy, right? Your tweets are limited to a certain number of characters. There's Twitter-specific slang. There's also misappropriation of tone, so words that typically mean something good that might mean something bad in certain context, right? Our favorite one that we found so far, being haunted would typically be considered bad. Agree? Yeah? Unless you're at a Halloween-themed event, right, in which case being haunted could actually be considered positive. Okay, so collecting your verbiage as it comes from a social media standpoint is not necessarily simple from the standpoint that words don't always mean the same thing, right? So tone matters. There's also the fact that not everyone is on social media. Although I'll contend to you, not everyone will answer your survey either, right? So that's not a perfect measurement of everyone. And not everybody cares, right? So most of us, you won't admit it now because you have survey guilt, because you've been sitting in this audience. But most of us are guilty of picking and choosing which survey topics we will and won't respond to, right? Which ones you do and don't care about. And we know that your social media posts, which are generally unprompted, or we believe they're generally unprompted, although they're largely affected by what you've seen, right? So it's also a network effect. However, at the end of the day, I acknowledge these limitations, right? Not everyone's on there. There is potential to be misreading what you intended based on slang and other limitations for posts. So we have a couple ongoing projects at Purdue that we're going to talk about. The problem fundamentally from a data science, from a decision-making standpoint, is that individual companies own the data that they're creating, right? So from a researcher standpoint, from the public institution, I don't necessarily have access to that data. The question is, do you say enough about what you're buying in a public setting that I don't actually need that data because you'll just tell me, right? So I don't know how many of you were at last night's talk, right? But basically, we're all just rampant oversharers, right? I mean, that's pretty much what I learned. We rampantly overshare, and also the more you share, the less people like you, which is interesting, right, as we're all sitting on Twitter. But the internet is largely this public domain, and so we're out there collecting data about these topics that matter to us from an ag econ standpoint. So all the data that I'm going to show you is still a work in progress. If you have interest in some of these at greater depth, feel free to reach out, and I'd be glad to converse with you further, but please don't cite these directly. So there's a significant investment in tuning for each particular topic, so that means looking at the verbiage specific to that topic and tailoring what those words mean in context, right? And so all of these projects are at various stages of tuning. Fundamentally, we in ag think we know what the public thinks about food production. My question is, what if what we think is not what actually is? Right? So we talk about it as though we know what people want. But are we correct? So this is one of my favorite quotes. So it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Right? And there's extra irony here because apparently a quote about not knowing things was falsely attributed to Mark Twain in the opener of The Big Short, but he actually never said it. So it's like double-layered irony quote. Basically, it's probably more dangerous to be certain of yourself that you know something that turns out not to be true than to simply admit that we don't know. So with that as a starting point, there's a couple of projects we have going on. We'll start with Galentine's Day. This is one that my PhD student, so Courtney, who's hiding in the third row, got charged with this one last year. This was our proof of concept. It's on Twitter, so you can go and download that if you're truly interested. And then we're going to walk through a couple examples. So we're going to go through our proof of concept, then we'll move on to doing eggs. We have one called #Purdue. So we're actually tracking what the internet says about Purdue University over the last 2 years. And then we'll finish with mosquitoes. Right, so something for everybody. If you don't like eggs or Purdue, then you've got mosquitoes. Okay, so we'll start there. So our proof of concept, we did Valentine's Day versus Galentine's Day. Galentine's Day is a fake holiday, if you're unaware, which was invented in the second season of Parks and Rec, and it's dedicated to friendship, not romance, right? So it's like the anti-Valentine's Day of Valentine's Day. Okay. Valentine's Day, we all know what that is, right? Yeah. Look how unexcited about Valentine's Day. So we called this holiday evolution by social media, Will You Be My Galentine? So why did we do this? We were looking for a broadly appealing proof of concept, right? So are we able to collect this data at the time frame that we're needed, at the speed that's needed to process it, and actually come up with something usable, right? So that was the question. It also just seems fitting that if you're going to do social media-based research, a fictitious social media-created holiday seems like a great start, right? And what did we learn? So we know that of the posts on Galentine's Day, 84% came from females, and 99% of those were positive. 59% of the posts about Valentine's Day came from females, and 89% were positive. There's like a theme coming. Galentine's Day, we only got 16% male. Valentine's, 41%. Only 87% positive about Valentine's Day. So let me remind you, this is free will sharing this, right? No one asked you, how was your Valentine's Day? This was your sharing. And so something we talk about a lot in social media is this sentiment, right? Sentiment is basically positive minus negative. So it's trying to give a measure of how positive something is, so bigger number, better, right? So I want to see a bigger number, and so what I find is that the net sentiment for Galentine's Day is 96%. Okay, sentiment swings from negative 100 to positive 100. So 96, pretty good, right? As in the highest we've ever seen on any topic we've measured. And Valentine's, 76%. So fictitious made-up holiday, better than Valentine's Day, right? What does that mean? I have no idea, right, how that's useful, other than we can do it. All right, so with that in hand, let's move to, I have a couple example topics for you. So we in the Department of Ag Econ have spent a lot of time looking at laying hens. So when you think about egg production, this is a major point of contention from a consumer standpoint, right? So the conditions that laying hens are housed in, how are chickens actually being housed, bred to produce eggs. We have two what we would consider more traditional research papers, right? So cracking into the debate about laying hen housing was a cost-benefit analysis that looked at what if you gave hens cooled perches to set on, right? So if you get hot and you had a cooled perch that had cool water running through it, would that make hens more productive? Would that be more profitable? Very interesting. I'm going to argue from a production standpoint. We also then did a standard survey measuring consumer perceptions of different housing types, right? And so we asked, would you rather have hens be free range, or would you rather we enrich the cages, or how do you want to see these hens housed? But for the purposes of this conversation, we also went back and said, okay, let's back up. If we just go online and see what people say when they talk about eggs, what are people talking about, right? So what do people say about hens and egg production? So we find out that the net sentiment's 51%, so quite positive, right? 75% of the 16 million posts or mentions are positive, 25% are negative. So considering how much time we spend talking about the negative consumer perception, it might be a little bit surprising, right, to find out that actually I have quite a bit more positive chatter on the internet over a 24-month period than I do negative. We spend some time measuring, can I tell, does it vary by the day of the week? So I can tell the published date and time for about 6.5 million posts. And it turns out that chatter about eggs is pretty steady, actually, day after day. We could maybe have an argument about Sunday, right? So apparently this is the love of brunch. Although it's a pretty small difference, I'm not ready to argue it's statistically significant, but basically we talk about eggs at a pretty consistent basis. There doesn't seem to be a major pattern sticking out. If we look at where this is coming from, about 10 million of the 16 million posts are on Twitter, right? If I go down the line, Reddit, and then backyardchickens.com, okay? Instagram, chicken Instagram, yeah. TripAdvisor, and then I move into fitness and bodybuilding. Okay, so if we just do a general survey of what's out there on the internet, right, so far, not exactly lining up with where our major research priorities were, right, addressing consumer concerns about housing. If we just look at the word cloud, so if I go through these 16 million posts and pull out what are the words that appear most often, what do I see? It really comes down to consuming and not producing, right? So if you're talking about eggs, you talk about apparently what you do to them. So deviled, boiled, scrambled, bacon, because I mean, who doesn't, right? Bacon's showing right there in the center. Eggs Benedict, poached eggs, bacon with eggs, right? You're seeing a theme. Basically, it's breakfast. When we start looking across words that have to do with how you feel about it, eating out, breakfast, cooked, good, right? By and large, what we see at the very top of mind in terms of social media is eating, right? Not necessarily on the producer side. So if we go through and actually look for the housing types that we were studying free range, enriched colony, battery cage, which is your conventional housing, and cage free. So if we go through and actually say, okay, of the posts, how many of them mentioned free range and what's the sentiment associated, right? What you see very clearly is that battery cage has a negative sentiment. Also, very, very few mentions of battery cage, although not as few as enriched colony, which is interesting because from an animal science standpoint, enriched colony performs quite well, right? And we spend a lot of time talking about enriched colony housing and the pros and cons associated with that housing type. So apparently we spend a lot of time talking about that. What we see is 266, which is compared to 16 million, remember where we started? Not a whole lot of time spent talking about that. And we see that if we put a sentiment number by housing type, clearly cage-free housing showing the highest sentiment, right? So from one standpoint, what we do see is preference for the same housing types that we saw preference for in surveys. So on one hand, when I asked you about housing types, I'm pretty much finding the same order of preference for housing type as I see sentiment for housing type. However, I don't think we can go back and forget when I said, what do you think about eggs, right? People weren't volunteering this at a very large number right up front. And so that probably is something to consider. Also, for any food item that we're going to talk about, right? So this is if we graphed over time, going back starting in 16. We're ending in April of 18 over here on the right. And we have this sort of major hit, right, to perceptions of eggs. What happened in April of 2018 to eggs? Salmonella outbreak, yeah, right? And so we can't forget that for a food item, right, so we can discuss housing types and hen conditions and all these different factors that go into production. Remember, when people were talking about it is how do we cook them, how do we eat them, how do we consume them, and then overriding all of that is food safety, right? And so you end up with this major hit that causes a major decrease in the sentiment surrounding eggs that has to do with food safety of the product. So perhaps some agreement, I would say, to what we found in the survey work, although some other things to be considered when we're looking at it from a social media standpoint. Comments on eggs? I forgot to mention, I'm happy to take questions throughout, so feel free to throw those out if you want before we move on topics. Yeah?
How did you get this data?
So we are creating these data sets in-house. We use a platform called NetBase, although there are lots of different platforms, right? You can think of it as you can really think of it almost as a really sophisticated Google, right? So I'm able to crawl between Twitter, Reddit, basically anything that's not behind a locked or paid wall, right? And it's not Facebook, so it's not protected. So I can crawl all of those things, and I'm looking for keywords in conjunction with keywords while excluding other keywords, right? So we're literally building it the code of, I want you to read everything that's out here, and I want you to bring me back comments that talk about eggs with battery cages, bring back the verbiage, so we can put it through language analysis and determine, is that positive or negative about eggs, right? And then very lucky graduate students get to read all of those comments and further train those algorithms to determine, right, is that really a positive word in this setting or not? Yeah, so great question. So it is indeed, right, somewhat a product of our coding of what it is that we're searching for, right? And so we're working on publishing some of this, some of these findings, and a big part of this is what are the exact words that you strung together and what are the exact words that you eliminated, right, as you're working on this. Egg is a shockingly common word in gaming. Okay, look at all you who, yep, right, oh yeah, I would have got that. Yeah, so there are different factors like that that do involve some cleaning, right? And so you should be careful about that when people are going to show you data like that. How much care did you take to actually clean it? We've seen a fair amount of really sloppily pulled social media data, right, where we say things like, what about eggs in gaming? Well, right, those should not be in here. Those should be cleaned out. It's a fair amount of time and money to clean them out, but it should be done, right? So if we're arguing from a data quality standpoint, research-wise, you have to do it. We are also able to go back and link. So if I know that you were talking about free range, for example, can I go and find the hashtags that you included in those posts? Some of these can be quite interesting, right? So if you were talking about free range, we also saw hashtags for organic, this is interesting, for vegan. And so, right, so doesn't necessarily mean that you said you were, right, but it simply means that in talking about free range, I'm finding a hashtag for vegan that's showing up in my top 4 posts. Is probably something to be thought about if you're operating in that space, right, and how these ideas may or may not be linked together, or at least they're in the same conversation. Okay, so that was eggs. Now for a lighter topic. Okay, pardon me, sorry. So just for fun, we'll take a break before we go to mosquitoes and disease control, and we'll start with Purdue. So we spent quite a bit of time tracking the sentiment and the posts about not only Purdue, but other Big Ten, R1, Division I universities, right? So if we think about it from a brand management standpoint, what's actually out there being said about Purdue? So this is a 2-year run back from today, and a couple things jump out. A, relatively high sentiment, right? So over the 2 years, I think we run, is it 38%? Roughly. You also notice, look at how little chatter. When is this happening? Summer, right? And as we dive into this, what is it that people are actually saying? So my green positives, obviously it's good if you won, right? Team, big, leading, first, Purdue, Boilermakers, hashtag boiler up, right? These make sense. Getting beat, lost, upset are all bad. Okay, so based on these words, what's driving a lot of the sentiment? Sports. So when do things get said about Purdue University? So remember, eggs was pretty consistent. Purdue is not. Right? We tweet on Saturdays. So thankfully, this data only goes back 2 years. Okay. So, sorry, I'm fighting a cold, and apparently now it's going to be a lecture by a frog. So as we're tracking, right, we're able to see these differences in terms of how these things appear. Okay, we're going to move to example 3. So here's our final one. This is the one that we're spending the most time and energy on right now that I think has the biggest economic potential. So we know that the CDC tells us all the time about mosquito prevention? Nope, you guys look like you don't know. Okay, so people tell you all the time, right? What do you actually do for mosquito prevention? Yeah, you're supposed to. Yeah. How many actually do nothing? Okay, so roughly representative of our survey data. Okay, so we had a pretty serious health impact, right, come onto the scene in 2016. So from an econ standpoint, Zika creates a major challenge for who? Yeah, pregnant women. Everyone. Okay. Although you all just told me you don't do anything about prevention, right? So where are people concerned? Yeah, so the Southeast, the South, right? And in particular, island nations in the Caribbean. Okay, so from an economist standpoint, the problem with island nations in the Caribbean being faced with a major health concern is that if people avoid those locations because of a health concern, what have we done to the income of those countries? Yeah, so I turn off the tourist dollars at exactly the time that the local population is fighting a disease outbreak, right? So we did a study that asked, okay, how worried are you about Zika, and are you likely to avoid travel to these places? And what do we find out? Well, we find out, so 84% of our sample of just under 1,000 people across the US was aware of an outbreak. I don't know where the other 16% were living, but, right, so 84% are aware. And after that, honestly, so incubation period, 31% of people said they knew. The CDC has a recommendation for pregnant women to avoid. 30% of people said they knew that. So basically, we're aware, but we don't know much else, right? We know it's a problem, but most people didn't have a lot of in-depth information. When it came to symptoms, 81% of people got the fact that there was a birth defect associated with this virus. After that, we don't know, right? So it's pretty clear what's standing out to people. Major concern for pregnant women, major birth defect associated, but you don't know much else. And when I ask about prevention, you pretty much do nothing, right? So 50% said they used a bug spray or insect repellent. Removing standard water was 1 in 5 people, right? So for the most part, yes, there's something going on, I'm aware of it, but no, I don't really do much. Which, quite frankly, is fair enough, right? That's probably a pretty standard reaction to something that's not threatening at home. If we actually go in an unstructured setting and we listen across the whole US and the US Virgin Islands, we are looking for chatter on mosquitoes, very broadly defined, right? So that includes, I got a mosquito bite. I hate mosquitoes, right? You get the idea. And what you see is that back in 2016, there was this pretty significant spike, which makes sense. We had it in all the news. It was a major focus at that time. Then what do you see here? There's a pattern. It's summer, right? So then we start talking about mosquitoes every summer. Well, what do we say about them? So in a 27-month period, virus and Zika virus were huge focuses of this conversation, as well as, this makes sense, pregnant women, babies, infection, right? So all of the things that would align with what we learned from the survey. Mosquitoes, it turns out, pretty negative sentiment, so negative 55. That's 140.7 billion potential impressions of this information being shared over that 27-month period. The Zika virus is even worse, so negative 58%, 83.2 billion potential impressions. Here's the scary part. When we look at what people are simply talking about out there, you see that mosquitoes comes back every summer. What about Zika? Has the risk gone away? So I think there's some potential from a social listening standpoint, right? We know that Zika has fallen off the radar. You talk about mosquitoes, nobody likes a mosquito bite. You put it on Instagram, which nobody wants to see your mosquito bite. But you don't talk about the actual threat. And if you look, it's actually a pretty consistent downward trend, right? We're approaching zero chatter about Zika specifically. So I think this is a case where on the dawn side, we can actually look at this as a way to know what you are and aren't focused on, right? So we have a relatively legitimate health threat for a lot of the country that's fallen off of focus. So is that something that we should be doing something about, right? Is it time for another educational campaign? Is it time for more focus on Zika specifically, if people are no longer keeping it on their radar? We're also working on #milk, but I have no data for you, right? So the problem with milk is that unlike eggs, where eggs show up in other places, milk shows up across multiple food items called milk, but it's not milk, right? So I don't know how many of you are following. There's the Dairy Pride Act, right? That's in conversation. So should you be able to call something like almond milk, milk? Or should it be called almond juice? Right? So the fundamental question is, can you milk a bean? Right? Okay, that's a different talk. Yeah. So we are working on measuring perceptions of other commodities like we did eggs, right? And milk is on the radar, but it's a particularly hard one to filter, because when people say milk, they may or may not be talking about the same thing, right? So it's not a matter of, was your milk produced by grass-fed cows versus not? It's literally a matter of, when you said milk, did you mean cashews, right? Or did you mean cows? So that one's taking quite a bit more time. But fundamentally what we're talking about, if we kind of break it down from a social media standpoint, we'll start with doom because I want to end happy. So if we start with doom, right, pretty much every virtual move you make, who's watching, right? So if it's on a platform that somebody owns and controls, are they selling it? Don't be surprised, right? Facebook said from the beginning that's how they were going to make money. We can all be upset, but you can't be surprised. So what are they doing with that data? Is it a profit motive question? I don't know the answer. So at this point, what is private as it comes to social media data, right? Like, you willingly share it, you put it out there. Is it really fair to put it out there and then be surprised that someone used it, right? There's also the fundamental question of, why did you put it out there, right? We've seen a lot of pictures of your mosquito bite, right? I'm not sure exactly what the intent of sharing it was. I do know that there's intent in using it. So how's your data being used, right? Marketing seems like the pretty benign answer to how your data is being used, right? If I use your data to show you something else you might want to buy, that seems pretty benign compared to using your data to market to political ends, right? Or attempt to control. So we know that there's an underbelly to this, that if I know everything about what you share, what you talk about, and who your friends are, right, can I use that to control what you're doing going forward? I think we know the answer is yes, right? Clearly, most people agree that you shouldn't be able to, but the capabilities are there. And fundamentally, the loudest voices are still the ones that are being heard, right? So it may or may not actually represent the public interest. Okay, so that's the doom side. If we go back to the dawn side, right, there is a positive to real-time crisis identification. So as you see topics building momentum, is there a chance to get in front of them with information that's critical to people at the right time, right? So we know that there's sharing of information in natural disasters on Twitter, and there's Facebook check-in safe, right? So there are aspects that are helpful in times of crisis in reaching multiple people. There is a bonus, I think, for being able to measure what is said naturally. So it's not the case of a survey where I ask you about it, therefore you answer me about a certain topic, right? So there is something to be said for surveying what you're just putting out there on your own free will. But I see it as a way to supplement, not replace other data sets, right? So it's not going to replace purchasing data. I don't think it's going to replace survey data, but I do think it can add another element to those conversations. And then clearly there's tailored marketing and brand management that we all complain about, but we all enjoy, right? You love it when Amazon picks out the right thing that you didn't know that you needed, right? You can act upset, but do you order it, right? And so there is an aspect of tailoring that we've all come to expect and we do actually enjoy. And I do think that there's research potential from the public good standpoint to understanding what people do and don't understand or what people do and don't talk about. So I don't know which. I think that what it comes down to is professionally I'm Dawn and personally I'm a little horrified. Right? So on one aspect, I see the positive for the greater good. I also see the potential for a lot of sort of invasion of what people perceived as privacy. We can debate whether that privacy was ever really there, right? But if you perceived it and it's since gone away, I can see how that's considered a major negative, and I don't think we've remedied that situation, right? So I certainly see both sides to the coin. I think there's potential, but I also think there's quite a bit of challenge. So with that, I'm sure you'll all unfollow me on Twitter, but I think I have a minute or two for questions or comments or disagreement.
On your crawling utility, how do you bound how far it goes and kind of get a sense of its temporal reach in terms of, you can't take the whole internet from the beginning of time and process it. So there's a bound to it, which is kind of going to say, I know where this sentiment is in time,
Right.
but you have to actually maintain the timeline as you do the analysis, because otherwise something topical is ephemeral and it's gone away, but you think it's a big deal.
Correct. So I can only go back 27 months from today at any point in time. So I'm constantly rolling forward, right? So if there's a topic that was of particular interest before that time, we missed it, right? And so that I cannot go to all of the sites, right? I mean, it's also a constantly moving and evolving game, right? Between who's allowed to search, who's not. So Instagram is constantly changing their policy for who can crawl through on Instagram or not, right? And so it's a constantly evolving aspect. I'm by no means claiming that I'm measuring the entirety of internet, but I do think there's something to be said, right? So when we're talking in the couple millions of data points, I'm relatively comfortable that I have something, right? Is it the majority voice? I'm not certain, but it's some voice, right, that we wouldn't have had otherwise. But it's a completely fair point. Yeah, we've also spent some time, so like Purdue, we've cut back to football season, right? So and if you look at it over football season, you get a very different sentiment reading. Then it depends on the season. We've also looked at it from an academic standpoint. So if I limit it to just people who say they got accepted or didn't get accepted to Purdue University, right, you get a very different conversation within there as well and within a certain time frame. So absolutely, it's kind of goes back to what are your search terms, right? What are you bounding in and out? How careful are you that you have what you think you have? And then time is definitely an aspect to that.
Are you using search tools provided by Facebook, or did you write your own, or what's going on there?
Yeah, so we're using NetBase as our platform to search, although we're not at all able to search Facebook. So we're outside of Facebook completely, and at this point, we have not nor have any intention of buying Facebook data. So we've stuck quite clearly to searching the publicly available written word or photos, right, Instagram, what they will make available.
What are some of the walls that have come up here recently, mainly due to the fact of privacy and all that stuff that may or may not have been in place in the past?
Yeah, so it is a constantly evolving, so I said we're using NetBase as our platform, right? So NetBase has agreements with, so I'll use Instagram since they're constantly changing. And so it does constantly change what you are or are not able to do within the Instagram platform. right? And so it's changing on a by platform basis as well as over time. We started into this after Facebook became mostly unreachable, right? So I can't answer, I missed the kind of major transition from when people lost access to Facebook, although Facebook has always been very difficult to access because they're trying to sell it separately.
So we have time for one more question.
So you said your upcoming term is milk, but are you hoping for your team to get to a place where they're agile enough that once we see like the beginnings of the word salmonella, or we hear like CDC announcing that there's a concern, and then you can jump on whatever the relevant search term would be?
Yeah, so at this point, we actually have what we're calling like an umbrella term built for animal agriculture as well as crop agriculture, right? And so I think we're already at a point where we can be pretty agile within. Milk was one that was of particular interest for me, and so that one's turning out to be a bit more difficult, but for the others, we are able to search within kind of cross-commodity under that umbrella. So yeah, the intent, I would hope within another year, our frameworks are a little more in place that we're able to search within ag, right? And we don't run into this time frame problem, because then you're already up and running when you want to go back and look at the time frame. So that is the goal. I will admit that coding and cleaning and reading these data sets was a much more significant investment than what I might have appreciated at the very beginning. So we're a little bit behind on it, but yeah, the intent is to be able to capture those. What you're really looking for is uptick in chatter, right? So there's constant chatter all the time, but when something goes up by 300% in a week, you do want to be able to go back and look at that immediately. So yeah.
So thank you, Dr. Widmar, for presenting to us today. There'll be a bit of a break, and then there's another presentation in here in a little bit. Thank you.